Professor Lyra Keene stood before the assembled cadets of the Galactic Academy's Advanced Xenolinguistics course, her datapad projecting holographic symbols that shimmered in the air like captured starlight. The lecture hall was a marvel of engineering, tiered seating arranged in a perfect semicircle, accommodating beings from 17 different species, each with their own atmospheric requirements carefully managed by environmental zones. The third principle of cross-species communication, Lyra continued, her voice carrying through the translation matrices embedded in each seat, is understanding that silence itself is a language. What humans perceive as uncomfortable pauses, the crystalline collective experiences as profound eloquence. In the front row, a cluster of Vaxian delegates shifted their chitinous frames, mandibles clicking in what Lyra had learned to recognize as thoughtful agreement. Behind them, the gaseous Aurolians swirled in their containment spheres, color patterns flickering with interest. And in the third tier, nestled among the more conventional bipedal species, sat the Carathian contingent, furred, fanged, and possessing what Earth's ancient classifications would have called distinctly mammalian features, despite evolving on a planet 300 light-years from humanity's cradle. Among them was Kor, a juvenile who had distinguished himself in the previous semester as both exceptionally bright and exceptionally bold. His species, the Carathians, were apex predators on their homeworld, standing nearly 7 feet tall when fully grown, with retractable claws and amber eyes that could track movement across a darkened battlefield. They had conquered their planet through strength and strategy, building an empire before discovering they were not alone in the cosmos. The discovery had terrified them, because the cosmos was full of things much stranger and more powerful than any predator. Lyra advanced her presentation, calling up a linguistic map of the Andromeda Gateway species. Now, when we examine the modal particles used by a soft thump interrupted her. Then another. The characteristic sound of padded feet on synthetic flooring. Every head in the lecture hall turned. Every eye, compound or simple, focused on the same sight. Kor, the young Carathian cub, had left his seat and was padding down the aisle toward the podium. His ears were perked forward, tail swishing with unmistakable intent. The Vaxian delegate's antennae shot straight up in alarm. The Aurolian's colors shifted to warning crimson. A Centaurian in the back row half rose from their seat, forearms tensing. They all knew what Carathians were: predators, dangerous, their own species' first contact. With the Carathian Empire had involved territorial disputes and near wars before diplomacy prevailed, and now one was approaching a human. Humans, those strange, soft-skinned beings from a death world called Earth. The species that had somehow survived evolution alongside creatures that made Carathians look tame. The species whose idea of bonding exercises included something called extreme sports and whose literature was filled with stories of their ancestors hunting megafauna with pointed sticks. The galaxy had learned quickly. Humans were either very brave or very stupid, and the line between the two was often academic. Lyra glanced down as Kor reached the podium. The cub sat, looking up at her with those enormous amber eyes, and made a soft chirping sound. "Hello, Kor," Lyra said calmly, as if a 200-pound predator hadn't just positioned itself at her feet mid-lecture. The tension in the room could have powered a plasma drive. Kor chirped again, more insistently, and placed one massive paw on the edge of the podium platform. The Centaurian was definitely standing now. "Professor Keene, perhaps—" "It's fine," Lyra said, her tone carrying that peculiar human quality of being simultaneously reassuring and completely unbothered by something that should, by all reasonable standards, be bothering her considerably. Kor's second paw joined the first on the platform. Then, with the kind of deliberate movement that predators use when they've decided something belongs to them, the cub hauled himself up onto the raised podium where Lyra stood. A Vaxian delegate made a sound that the translator rendered as, the podium wasn't large. It was designed for one being to stand and present, not for a human and a juvenile apex predator to share space. Kor solved this problem by simply pressing against Lyra's side and sitting down, his bulk taking up most of the available area. Lyra adjusted her position slightly to maintain her view of the datapad, now basically pinned against her hip by 100 kilograms of fur and muscle and teeth. "As I was saying," she continued, pulling up the linguistic map again with her free hand, "the modal particles are crucial because, Kor, your ear is in my face. The cub's ear, the size of a dinner plate, had indeed flopped forward to partially obscure Lyra's vision. Without pausing her lecture, she reached up and scratched behind it, the same way someone might absently adjust their glasses. Kor's response was immediate and devastating to the room's collective anxiety. He began to purr. The sound was deep, resonant, rattling through the lecture hall like distant thunder. It was the sound of a creature completely, utterly content. His eyes half closed and his tail, which had been swishing with nervous energy, settled into a gentle sway. The modal particles, Lyra continued, now effectively giving her lecture, while providing ear scratches to an apex predator, indicate subtle shifts in social hierarchy within a conversation. For instance, the Aurelian color spectrum actually, she paused, adjusting her scratch to a spot behind Kor's other ear when the first one flopped the other direction, actually corresponds to what humans might call register in linguistics. Formal versus informal speech. The assembled cadets were no longer watching the holographic display. They were watching their human professor, lecturing on xenolinguistics while casually petting a creature that could, theoretically, bite her head off, and she was just continuing. As if this was normal, as if this was fine. A young Vaxian in the second row slowly raised a claw. "Professor, is this part of the lesson?" Lyra smiled, that particularly human smile that the galaxy had learned to interpret as, "I'm about to make a point." She scratched under Kor's chin and the purring intensified. "Actually, yes. Kor here is demonstrating something essential about interspecies communication that I can't teach with holograms alone." She gestured to the cub with her free hand. "Context, intent, trust. The Carathians are one of the most efficient predator species in known space. They evolved to hunt, to dominate, to survive through strength. But Kor came to me not because he sees me as prey or even as an equal in physical terms." Kor shifted, pressing his head more firmly into her hand, demanding continued attention. "He came because he's learned that some forms of communication transcend predator and prey dynamics. Because somewhere in his education here he learned that humans," she scratched behind his ear again, "have been coexisting with predators since before we left our own planet. We domesticated wolves. We befriend cats who are, biologically speaking, perfect killing machines. We do this thing where we see a dangerous animal and think, but what if friend?" Nervous laughter rippled through the lecture hall, mostly from the species who'd spent the last 3 months being confused by human behavior. "The lesson," Lyra said, "is that communication isn't just about words or even body language in the traditional sense. It's about building bridges across impossible divides. It's about a prey species and a predator species learning to share space, literally and figuratively." She gave Kor one final scratch and he opened his eyes fully, looking out at the class with an expression that might have been smug if translated across species lines. "Now," Lyra said, "can someone tell me how this interaction might be interpreted differently by a non-tactile species?" The crystalline collective representative, who existed as a sentient silicon matrix, pulsed with light, their version of raising a hand. As they began to speak, Lyra continued her lecture, one hand absently resting on Kor's head. The galaxy, the assembled cadets realized, was full of predators and prey, of strong and weak, of countless species with countless differences. But humans looked at all of that and decided that classification systems were merely suggestions. Class continued.